today before the closing remarks, and that's on GDPR. And Craig Clark's joined us from University of East London to talk about that. So, thank you.
GDPR, last thing on a Friday afternoon. Don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse or it's on purpose, but we will persevere. Now, I hopefully won't take half an hour of your time, because I'm envisaging there'll probably be quite a few questions. I'm not sure how this presentation is going to go. Hopefully you'll find it helpful, or I will be the most hated man in the room. So we will see where we go with that as we go through. So I'm Craig Clark. I'm the Head of Data Protection and Compliance at the University of East London. I've been doing data protection for a very long time. I was considered boring until about last year, and then all of a sudden I find that I get invited to lots of these, which is always good. My background is also in social engineering. If you can't figure out why, then I would suggest you go to an airport and watch how wheelchair users are treated at airports. You will find very quickly that there are lots of security risks. So, this is what we're going to go through today. We're going to go through the scope of the changes, some of the grey areas, something that I like to refer to as GDPR Light, UEL strategy, barriers that we've had to compliance, and a brief action plan. I will be around at the end for some questions if you have any. That is essentially the scope. I'm sure you've all received several emails already this week asking you if you are ready for GDPR and if you can comply. I would say 99 times out of 100, unless you have binding corporate rules, the answer is probably going to be no. As you can see, accountability feeds in at the top, which is new to GDPR. And then you've got all sorts of other good stuff. A lot of that has to still be decided, which we will go through in a minute, but that's just a nice little slide of all of the things that we've all got to do before next May, which will cheer everybody up. GDPR guidance, so far, it's coming thick and fast, but it's not coming quick enough. If I could give you one take-home message, it would be do not wait for the government to clarify its position on GDPR. The reason for that is, I'm sure you've all seen it, if not read it, but the government have very hastily in the last couple of weeks published a call for review for the derogations for GDPR. There are lots of them. I've had it confirmed by somebody that will remain anonymous at the ICO that the government isn't planning to finalise their position on GDPR until next March, because they've got plenty of other things to be going on with, and the last thing that they really want to be thinking about at this moment is the GDPR. So we've had it confirmed. The one concrete answer I've been able to drag out of the ICO is that the government are looking to finalise a strategy for GDPR by next March, which doesn't leave you that much time if you wait for it. The Working Party 29, I strongly recommend you bookmark that website. That has all of the guidance that will be the European Data Protection Board in waiting. The ICO has the good guidance on GDPR, but I would strongly urge you to check the version. The last time I gave this talk, lots of people waved the big yellow booklet on GDPR at me without realizing that we're already on version 7. I think the earliest version I saw was version 2. I think last week it was version 7.1. They don't tell you when they've updated it, and they don't give you a version history, so please visit the website regularly because it is likely to change. The Irish Data Commissioner has published some very good guidance called the GDPR Renew. It's very well worth a read. Grey areas, there are lots of them. The articles, you will see countless media articles referring to the articles specifically within GDPR, Article 9, Article 4, Article 83. They are important, but the detail lies in the recitals. I can never remember this list off the top of my head. But to give you an idea, Article 4 deals with consent, but the definitions for consent are also dealt with in Recital 32, 33, 38, which is the scientific purposes recital for consent, but also Article 6, 6.1a, 6.4.2, Article 7, 8, and 9, 9 subparagraph 2A, etc., etc. All of those recitals and articles deal with different variations on the theme of consent. So anybody that says consent is all wrapped up nicely within Article 4, they are lying to you, and they haven't read the recitals. There are over 50 instances where the UK government could decide to go down a slightly different route. They are derogations, every member state has them, and they talk of harmonisation. Not quite sure how that's going to work yet, but I'm sure we'll get there. We may, as a country, decide to look at GDPR Light following Brexit. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. The interpretation of the derogations plus the Digital Economy Bill. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with where the Digital Economy Bill is. So the Digital Economy Bill is going through Parliament at the moment. Discussions were stopped for the dissolution of Parliament last week. But interestingly, it could have a significant impact on any adequacy decision that we have. To give you an example, whilst the GDPR does away with registration fees for data controllers, the Digital Economy Bill puts them straight back in. So theoretically, at least, I've done a few sums, and for large data controllers that currently pay £500, you could pay up to £7,000 if my sums are correct. I've worked with a few people on those sums. I'm not entirely sure that we will get to that stage, but that's just to give you an idea that we need to be looking at wider pieces of legislation. The Digital Economy Bill, the e-privacy regulations, all of them will have a say and have an influence to one degree or another on how the UK implement GDPR. As I've said at the beginning, the final implementation on how the UK will implement the GDPR isn't expected until 2018. More grey areas. There is a revised funding model for the ICO, but that hasn't yet been finalised, but that was announced by Elizabeth Denham at the Data Protection Conference in April of this year up in Manchester. They've asked for an additional 200 staff. You're getting rid of the registration fees under GDPR, but that funding has to come from somewhere, and assuming that the Treasury doesn't give them a handout, one would suppose that that may come from a funding within the Digital Economy Bill. There is a new enforcement strategy. Again, that hasn't yet been finalised. I don't suspect that to be finalised much before next year. A new team set up by Jonathan Bamford. I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of speaking to Jonathan Bamford. He was placed up in Wilmslow in Cheshire with the rest of the ICO, but given the complexity of the GDPR, he has moved down to London. They are looking to audit increase their auditing capabilities. Previously, the auditing was limited, but obviously, as I'm sure we all know, the ICO is going to have some significantly increased powers to audit. And lastly, Brexit could lead to GDPR Light. Now, it's quite a wordy slide. I'm not going to go through all of it. The key points that I want to pick up, token fees for subject access requests under Article 15. If you actually read the recitals associated with Article 15, whilst the ICO have said fundamentally that subject access needs to be free, buried within the recitals there is a mechanism to charge for repeat documentation. You can charge a nominal fee for subject access for repeat documentation, particularly voluminous or vexatious requests. And the easiest way to get around that is to trial electronic responses to subject access. It would be very interesting to see if they revise the rules on trans-border data flows and data processing under the current Principle 8 of the Data Protection Act. There is some significant room for manoeuvre. That's all going to change if we adopt GDPR as it is at the moment. So look, fair processing notices, that's always a good one. I'm pretty sure legal departments up and down the country are battling with fair processing at the moment. I know I am. And the requirement for data controllers to document fewer of their processes in order to demonstrate accountability, that flies in the face of the core accountability principle in the final text of the GDPR, so I'm not sure how that would work, but that is essentially what a GDPR Light could look like. UEL strategy, so after roughly 16 months of backwards and forwards, the Vice-Chancellor's group relented and realised that GDPR isn't going away, so they appointed me as head of data protection. I have looked at formalising a GDPR working group consisting of all of the stakeholders or representatives of each department within VCG and within the wider business, both academic and the support services. I wanted to call it a GDPR task and finishing group, but they said that that sounded too formal and that it sounded like too much work, so I'm going to call it a working group instead. Our CIO is acting as the risk owner with regular updates to the VCG. It helps that I very helpfully pointed out to him that as CIO, if there was a data breach under GDPR, he would be the next Dido Harding. He very quickly came on board. We're trying to work to the ICO's current code of practices and looking at their specific audit areas. All of this does exist on the ICO's website. Some of it's more widely publicised than others. I'll go into that a little bit shortly. We simply can't be compliant with GDPR at the moment because we simply do not know, and nobody in this room or nobody in the country knows what way the derogations are going to go. So there is going to be a significant period where we are looking at the best practice and working towards that. That's essentially what it looks like. I didn't have time to colour it in. It looks awful on the slide as it is, and I was going to colour it in, and in our strategy documents there are lots of nice colours. We've got accountability at the top there. I am looking to, when all of the codes of practice are finalised for GDPR, looking to get accreditation to BS 10012. The current version has just been launched for GDPR compliance, so that's what we're looking at. But we're also combining the information governance and the risk management strategy as well. You can see there that we've had lots of talk about this already today, but training and awareness, records management, security. Note I've left information off there because it also ties in with the CCTV code of practice, so it looks at physical security as well. Information rights, which is going to be really important under GDPR. I have heard mention of a bedding in period or a leeway period, and whilst the ICO may understand that that is the case and they may be particularly cautious in the first 6 months, legal action can be taken directly against data controllers and data processors from affected data subjects from that date. So I'm sure the ICO would love to give us time, but you can be sued from the 25th of May. And being in a university and dealing with disgruntled students, I can see an industry popping up overnight. I've almost got the jingle in my head already. Are you unhappy with the way your data has been processed? If you are, give us a ring, no win, no fee. I can see that happening. I'm going to write to the advertising agencies and pitch a jingle shortly and make millions. So the last thing there is data sharing, model clauses, etc. Data sharing is going to come very important to us, particularly with Brexit. If we don't get the adequacy decision that we need following Brexit, you can think of China, North Korea and the UK, because that is how we will be viewed if we don't get the adequacy decision that we need. I strongly, strongly hope that the UK goes down the GDPR route and tries to enforce it in its fullest possible terms, because I dread to think what will happen. I have heard it said that the UK Data Protection Act will be sufficient. It won't. The UK Data Protection Act has been ruled to be deficient in 10 key areas by the European Commission, and the Article 29 Working Party do not like the Data Protection Act. They think it strays far too far away from the Data Protection Directive that it was originally based on. In fact, we are the only country of the 28 member states to go that far away from the current Data Protection Directive. So it's going to become very important that we get data sharing right. We've had quite a few barriers. The biggest one is time. As I've mentioned, it's taken me a good 14 or so months to get to where we are. We've left a lot to do, even though I have a very receptive CIO. The favourite argument from my finance director was that this is just another Y2K. It isn't, because this is a regulation. It is already in law. It has been enshrined into European statute. It's just not enforced yet. But I did have to suffer a wait and see period, and is this all going to go away? Ownership of data, data classification, data retention. I can see a few wry smiles in the audience. I'm glad you're feeling the same pain that I've had. Getting people to understand the different sets of data classification, public, private, confidential, is perfectly fine. They get that, they can see that, and they can understand it. Getting them to take ownership of when that data is deleted and not put it in a box, in a cupboard, and store it for the next 20 years has been quite difficult, and we have a lot of work to do. I have told people that if I see boxes of paper that look over 7 years old and I check the date, that they will be going out of the cupboard and into a destruction secure shredding. So I'm just waiting for that, see if that threat can get some movement. There is a degree of uncertainty, so we're probably, I will fully confess, we are probably not going to be compliant much before May 2018, but we will wait and see. We have worked very hard. We've got a core privacy team set up now. They have all got their tasks, and we have produced a roadmap to show just how much work we've got to do. So I'm hopeful that things will pick up speed. Our action plan, or the action plan, there's some key areas here. Get your buy-in from VCG. If you haven't already, I'm sure most of you have. If you haven't already, there is a wealth of information. One thing that I will say is that there are a lot of people using the 20 million euro maximum fines or the 10 million maximum fine. There is a key word that they often miss out, and that's the word undertaking. If you are an undertaking, which means if your core business is to make money, because undertaking in legal definition comes from competition law, if you are an undertaking, the maximum fine you can receive is 20 million or 4% of annual global turnover. If you are not an undertaking, and my interpretation of it is, as public authorities, we are not, in terms of competition law, an undertaking, then you cannot receive the maximum 20 million euro fine, regardless of what vendors tell you. That will all be clarified in the reviews. Be mindful of vendors and snake oil. I've lost count of the amount of arguments that I've had with vendors. Information security and privacy are two very, very different things. If I ask for a privacy statement and they say, yes, we're ISO 27001, I will say, that's great, but that doesn't answer my privacy question. If they say and come back to me very much like Robbie's cloud questionnaire, they turn around and utter the words, but we're compliant with Privacy Shield, I generally freeze and have a look on my face that conveys my fear. Privacy Shield, I don't like it. I don't think it's going to be around for very long. There hasn't been an official ruling from the European Courts of Justice yet, but my gut feeling and looking at all of the legal papers, the challenge isn't long in coming, and I can see very quickly in GDPR land Privacy Shield being debunked and going the same way as Safe Harbour. Assess your level of compliance with the DPA. Now, this is something that when I started in the data protection, I was absolutely amazed. There are all sorts of codes of practice, from employment to CCTV to assessment to information rights. There's lots and lots of them on the ICO's website. I asked all of the relevant heads, do you know where they are? Have you read them? Do you know what you should be doing? And the resounding answer I got back was no. Interestingly, this is something else that I found that not a lot of people have realised, or it hasn't been widely communicated. The ICO will do, if you volunteer for an audit from the ICO, they will come and they will audit you. When you say that to people, there is a look of horror. But under the ICO's assessment code of practice, if they audit you and find lots of skeletons, the worst that they will do is give you a chance to have an undertaking. They will not issue enforcement unless you do not take those undertakings on board. So you will not be fined as a result of a voluntary audit from the ICO. That is a target that I have set the organisation for the end of this year. I think it would be a very good idea to get the ICO's take on where we are and how much work we have actually done. There is going to be a lot of change within the ICO regardless of June the 8th and regardless of Brexit and everything else, so I don't know whether that offer is still available or will still be available towards 2018, but at the moment it is. One last thing, if you're struggling for a vision for your privacy programme, you can do a lot worse than that. The core thing, and I swear I'm going to have to get this engraved on the door to the IT department because it's something that I seem to be repeating again and again. Say what you do what you say, and just be happy to prove it. And that is accountability and transparency in a nutshell. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Okay, do we have any final questions on the day? One at the very back there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very useful presentation.
No problem.
I think we're all struggling trying to get the measure of the volume of work. Have you been able to get any scope for how much work is really involved in producing a resource plan?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the key thing that I've been asked a lot is how much is that going to cost us? And the simple answer is it depends how seriously you want to take it. Realistically, if you take the figure for a maximum fine, even a tier 2 €10 million fine, realistically, if you're not confident of that, I wouldn't be ashamed to say, well, have you got 10 million to spend to put this right in worst case scenario? The answer will invariably be no. What I have suggested as a starting point is to look at Article 30. If you can look at Article 30 and you can list out all of the requirements of Article 30 and you can document that, you can then take that to the organisation and say, this is just the information that we need to start. Another tip is for records management, if you look at the National Archives, it will give you a big long list of things that you should be looking to document in terms of good records management practice. Lastly, if it gives you any ammunition or food for thought, I actually mapped out every single requirement for data processors that you need to do for GDPR. At the last count, it was 52 separate bits of information you needed to map out your processes properly for GDPR. So hopefully that arms you with some useful tips.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I'd just like to say thank you very much
No
again.
problem, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.